Hello and welcome to a quick product demo about TraceCloud. This demo is specifically geared towards the alpha theme group. These are their product requirements. They would like to align business strategy with IT execution, ensure regulatory compliance, support the transformation efforts, reduce and remove working in silos, and have the ability to do either an agile, waterfall, or hybrid iterative development. I have broken each of these main topics into bullet points that will better help you understand and show how TraceCloud can help with those, and I'll be doing a demo for each of these. Let's talk about modeling your business strategy. What this basically means is, as you have multiple projects and multiple organizations, once you put a strategy plan in place that says these are my business requirements, and this is how they get approved and prioritized, and the further down the chain when the engineering organizations come along, this is how they take the change and implement that and execute that. That whole thing can be considered to be a model, and once you refine that, as new projects or organizations come on board, they can replicate the same model for their projects so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And let me demonstrate that with TraceCloud. I'm already logged in, and I will take a sample project. In my case, I call that my TCD. That's my demo project. We have defined this to have certain sets of requirement types, and there is a folder structure attached to it, and then there are users, and each of the users actually has permissions. So let's say this is my fully baked working project that has the structure I would like it to have. Later on, when a new project comes along and I want to start a new project, I can always go there and say I want to clone a project that has the model that I would like to use. And at that point, when I do the cloning of that, invariably I can say it's the same structure. That means the same requirement types, folders, roles, and permissions, same users. Maybe some of the requirements are the same, and I hit that clone button, and the next thing I know, I have a replica of that model in my new project. So that kind of helps you align your strategy, because once you define your model, all new execution projects start using the same model. But let's talk about a little bit more about how do you define models. And the first step there is defining your requirements management plan. What that means is, in your project, you'll be asking yourself, what are the different requirement types I want to track, right? In this example, when I open the TraceCloud project, there were some predefined requirement types the system gave me. However, I can always go to configure project and say I want to manage object types and create my new requirement type. For example, let's say you are doing a financial services type project, and you definitely want to have a requirement that says regulatory compliance requirements. Or if you're building a mall, you may want to have, say, local real estate guidelines. And so the system doesn't straitjacket you into these requirement types. You can always define your new ones. Once you define your requirement types, they basically show up something like this, at which point you can define additional attributes. We'll come to that later. Once you define your requirement types, the next thing you want to do is have folders, so that not all your requirements are jumbled into one file, but there is a method to that organization. And in this example, when I go back to the project, you could see I have my business requirements. I have about 1,654 of them. It doesn't make sense to keep all of them in one folder, so I may choose to have subfolders inside it, right? And TraceCloud lets you go deeper and deeper to create your subfolders. All you have to do is go here and do right click, and at this point you can actually create a subfolder inside and delete and organize and move requirements around, right? You could see I have a hierarchy of folders and subfolders. Now everything inside it is actually holding my business requirements. I have a similar structure for my functional requirements. I may have a different folder structure for that, right? That's how you can create and organize your requirements, so that when one team is working on a set of requirements, they aren't necessarily stepping on the toes of another team. Now that you have a folder structure, it becomes a pretty straightforward matter to say, well, I want to import my requirements that already exist in Excel, or they exist in Word, or I want to create them one by one. And the system is smart enough to say, well, when you want to import from Excel, it recognizes the Excel sheets, column labels, and helps you map those labels into requirement type attributes, so you don't have to repeat a lot of work you've already done. So there's a very easy Word and Excel import feature built into the system. Once you have the folder structure and you have your requirements in those folders, the next step for you would be to connect your business requirements to your IT tasks or engineering requirements and downstream requirements. And the way you would do that is, number one, those teams would come and they would create their functional requirements or import the requirements. And then there is this tool, I would say, functionality called a trace matrix. And the way a trace matrix works is, you can say, you know what, I'm going to select all my business requirements that exist in a folder. I'm going to select all my releases. And at this point, I am going to connect my business requirements to my releases. And you could do that one at a time if you wanted to, or you could do them, a lot of them at a time if you wanted to, right? So in this case, you're saying this release is the work of comprises all these business requirements. Alternatively, this business requirement actually is part of every single release. So this is a simple way to manipulate a lot of data and kind of actually visualize the relationship between, I would say, different types of requirements. But as you make these connections, the power of the system starts coming in. You start having a network effect, and we'll talk about that shortly. For example, I just connected my releases to my business requirements, and then I can say I'm going to take my engineering requirements, which are here, functional requirements, and I am going to connect them to my business requirements this time. And now you see a different matrix, and I could go and do the same relationship connections between my functional requirements and my business requirements. What you're doing as you do this work is essentially you're building a connection hierarchy between the work done by different organizations, so that you can get a single logical view of the entire work structure. And that would be called a trace tree. I will come to that slightly later. But once you have connected your business requirements to your IT requirements and further downstream requirements, you may want to define an approval workflow and control the change that is happening. Like, for example, one of the biggest risks that you might have right now is, well, I have my business requirements, but they keep on changing. And how do I know that they have been approved? In that case, you can actually define an approval workflow which states who the approvers are. For example, if I look at this folder called business requirements, when I go here, and you could see that product marketing has the rights to approve, and there are a few people in product marketing. So when I, as a user, create my requirements, I have the ability to submit them for approval, and they start showing up in their list for approval, right? And the system has built-in dashboards and notification mechanisms to keep track of it. For example, I know that there are a couple of requirements that I own that are pending other people's approval. I can go here, see what they are, chase them down, and get it done. In any serious requirements management product that is dealing with a large-scale organization, managing change is absolutely critical. We'll talk more about regulatory aspects of managing change further down, but know that TraceCloud can very gracefully both control the change, and once the change is approved, propagate it to make sure all the downstream systems and teams are aware of the change. The last piece of aligning business strategy with IT execution is, how do all the teams get visibility to what is a business priority, and how does business get visibility to what IT is doing with their particular task, right? So what TraceCloud has is, if you remember, when you connected one object to another object, the benefit of that is you get something called a change impact analysis. This tells you, for example, how your business requirement is tied to downstream objects, and are they actually doing the work on it or not. In this case, I can see my business requirement has a bunch of functional requirements, and most of them are complete at this point, and my business requirement is about 85% complete because most of the downstreams are complete. There is one here that is 23% completion and a test fail status. That information is bubbling up because this business requirement is tagged as test fail and only 85% complete, which is weighted average of all the downstream work. So this is one way your business teams can have complete visibility to what is happening further down the chain. If you remember the traceability work we did earlier, where we connected business requirements to functionals and business requirements to releases, that connection is what helps this information flow up and down the chain. Let's talk about regulatory compliance, especially if you're dealing with sectors like finance and real estate. You do want to make sure that your core requirements, change control and traceability are able to pass any regulatory needs. So one common requirement that pops up is, can you confirm to me that all the requirements that you're working on have been approved? And in TraceCloud, it is as simple as going to a folder and just saying, give me my folder metrics. And it tells you how many of the requirements in that folder are in different approval status. If you would like to get the same view from a release perspective, you can simply go to a release. Okay, let's say I'm working on this release, and on this release, you would say, well, show me my metrics for this release, because I really would like to see what my approval status is for everything that is connected to this release. And as you can see, the approval section, these are the different requirement types, and this is the approval status. 112 of 128 are approved. I can click on any of these links and drill down and get to details. I don't want to do that. If you want, you can do this at the project level. At a project level, you could say, well, show me what is happening. So I know that from an approval perspective, I'm all set. And this tells you from a project perspective how many requirements there are that are in different states of requirement approval. There is a concept, again, from a regulatory compliance and best practice perspective called dangling requirements. This is when your business organization wants something done and your engineering organization is saying, yes, we will do it. How do you know for sure that they're actually doing it? Occasionally, they may drop something off, and you won't catch it till much later, and that is a typical challenge. And especially if you're building a sensitive product, your regulatory agency might say you need to be aware of things that you think are getting done but are not, and you won't know them till much later. Those concepts are called dangling requirements. And the idea here is, if you're looking at a trace tree, let me show that to you. I already have a saved report here that will help me with that. Saved report. I've saved this in the past. It's called a trace tree. If I were to run this report, you could see this release has a business requirement, which has a functional requirement, which has a test case. In this model, yes, you see the letter D out here. This D means this object that is part of this functional requirement doesn't have anything below that to tell me that that work is being done. So when the project gets completed, this particular object will not get done because there's nobody doing any work downstream. So this D, or dangling visual indicator, tells me which of my functional requirements for the matter are not being done by anybody further down the chain. So it's a great indicator, and you can get this dangling metric from pretty much any level you are in. Let's say you're at a folder, you can go to folder metrics and find how much of the work in that folder is not being done by anybody downstream. You can get the metric at a release level, you can get it at a requirement level. It's a first-class citizen, I would say, of the TraceCloud system. So you should be able to see the dangling metrics wherever you go. The next thing is ensuring that your change is controlled. TraceCloud gives you the ability to lock down a folder Or if you don't want to lock down a folder, if you want to lock down an individual requirement, you can apply a lock on it so that nobody can modify it. So that there is a shotgun approach and a more surgical approach of controlling a change. You could say my entire folder is the permissions are set so that nobody can update. In this case, I have a bunch of people who could, but if we took these permissions off, pretty much nobody can update. It becomes a read-only. Or you could say, well, a small subset of audience can modify it, or you could lock down individual requirements themselves. But once the change has been modified, right? Let's say there is a reason you want to make a change, and the right people have made the change, and that's gone through an approval process. There is one more problem, which is, has the organization internalized the change and has everybody accepted it? For example, you're building a really tall building, you want it to be 80 stories, and somewhere along the way you went through a change approval process and decided to make it 81 stories. How do you know for sure that your architects, your civil engineers, your suppliers, everybody has accepted the change? That is where TraceCloud's suspectability comes into picture. Anytime you are looking at a requirement, if that requirement is connected to other requirements, it shows up as an arrow, and when this requirement itself ever gets changed, calculator will be, let's say I modify this requirement. First thing is the version number changes, so you can actually see that the change has happened and it is tracked in one place. More importantly, you will see that all the relationships between this business requirement and every other business requirement is suspect. And a typical business flow is you want the downstream team members, if they are in agreement with your change, to go and say, yep, I agree with the change and I'm fine with it, I'm in acceptance of it, right? That is a forcing function to make sure everybody in the team is on the same page. Or if you need to modify your requirement to suit an upstream requirement, you go ahead and modify yours. But the idea here is, anytime somebody is looking at their folder, they start seeing this arrow, the pink arrow, either up or down, that indicates, are there any changes in the organization that not everybody has accepted? And this gives you visibility to say, well, I'm very close to completing this release. However, as I'm completing this release, I'm seeing a lot of suspect upstream and downstream. That means there is this much change in the project that may have been made in an approved way, but not everybody, not every team is on the same page. They're working in their own silos. So you get really good visibility to say, people, there are these 40 requirements that seem to have a suspect upstream. Please take a look at it. And before you come to the next meeting, either you agree with it. If you agree with it, you have cleared your suspect trace. If you don't agree with it, you have a good reason for not agreeing with it, or you have modified your requirement to suit the need. So it's a very collaborative way of a distributed team keeping their department clean and in synchronization with all other departments. And this is the core strength of TraceCloud. Requirements traceability is in our name, and we really leverage the power of different departments connecting their work and then and trying to reduce the noise and managing change in a very elegant way. So that's how we can get to regulatory compliance. And from a transformation effort perspective, you can actually prioritize your tasks using TraceCloud, so everybody can see what your highest priority tasks are and how they are connected to your release number 1, which needs to go first. Therefore, everybody is focusing on release number 1. Then you go to release number 2, and you can see the progress of the release as time goes along. We talked about collaboration, but a little bit more on the collaboration front is, one is we talked about change propagation, but in TraceCloud, you can actually, as you go along, continue to kind of add comments to your requirements. And what that does is it is like a Facebook for requirements, where the system knows who all the stakeholders are. So anytime somebody makes a comment, it knows who needs to be notified based on their previous interest on that object, and it shows up in their dashboard. Or alternatively, you can always go here and say, show me the recent comments on this folder in the last, I don't know, 733 days, and I should be able to see all the comments made out here, right? Alternatively, when I go to my home page, I should be able to see all the comments in the project that are applicable for me in the last X number of days. Right? So that's what that is. You can, as I mentioned, report across not just within a project different requirement types, but your requirement traceability and reporting can work across projects. Like I was showing you earlier, this trace tree that I have, sorry, it's in my report, saved reports, trace tree. If you look at this trace tree, this can actually work across projects. This requirement doesn't have to be in the same project as this requirement. It could be anywhere, but this has the ability to kind of report across and say which dependent work is in different states of testing and completion. And the last few things is TraceCloud supports both a waterfall and an agile workflow. What you're looking at here is a typical waterfall model where you have a release which has business requirements, which has functional requirements, and you try to bring them to completion and test pass. If you want, you can actually leverage that in an agile model where you say, I'm going to create a sprint, I'm going to go to backlog and pick all the requirements in a certain folder and then bring them in to the sprint. And every time the team meets on Monday morning, we're going to look at the not started ones, assign them to an individual, and get them to in progress so that over time they become completed. At the end of the sprint, if these tasks are not completed, then we go to create a new sprint and assign all these tasks to that sprint. So a typical Scrum board model works very elegantly. The really neat thing is you could use a hybrid model where you say, I'm going to use the release with my requirements in the folders, and they go through an approval cycle and they're part of the release. But different teams can go off and create their own sprints and pull some of the work in. So as they complete it, as different sprints and different sprint teams complete their work, the release itself comes to a natural completion, and there's a release manager keeping track of work so they can work in coordination with the sprint teams. So a lot of organizations end up using that hybrid model because they love the power of your traditional traceability and change control, but being able to break that entire release into subsections that different teams can work on. And TraceCloud also comes with a full-fledged API layer, and it has integrations to products like Jira and a few others. But if you need something else custom, we can also take care of that. And finally, the system comes as both an on-premise and on-site online solution. This entire demo I was doing using the online solution. You get the exact same software designed to scale at the same level if you decide to go on premises. If you have any questions, please shoot us an email. It is support@tracecloud.com, and we should be, we'd love to have a WebEx and walk you through what I showed you right now, but definitely in more detail and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.